Hey guys. So it's been a little while. I wanted to try to quickly go over a few idioms from the Bible with you. I say quickly, tongue in cheek, because I always end up going longer than I thought I would go. With this video today, I'm just going to be breaking down probably 5 or 6 different figures of speech that were used commonly in the days when the Bible was written, and that will help us to understand what was being said. So I just want to jump into it. Again, for this video, I'm going to have links in the description box to all of my resources, as well as a shortened link that you can click on that will take you to a single document that has all the links in it for you there. And I'll reference some of those links as I'm going through the video. You don't have to really do your best to keep up, but if you want to keep up, that's why I'll be referencing those for you there. So the very first link that you'll see at the top, besides the shortened link, is a page that has 150 different idioms on it that are for English speakers, but it's primarily aimed towards like British English. So that you might see some on there that don't quite make sense to you as an American English speaker, but there's a lot of crossover as well. And I've got a few of my favorites. I have my notes here. Let me see here. Barking up the wrong tree, bite the bullet, by the skin of your teeth, cold feet, couch potato, elephant in the room, to quit cold turkey, raining cats and dogs, smell a rat, take it with a grain of salt, and under the weather. All right, so if I were to say any of these particular idioms to you, if you are a native English speaker, as I am, then you would know what the meaning is for most of those, right? If English is not your first language, or if they were translated word for word into your native language, most of the time, these particular ones that I just listed off will lose their meaning completely in that translation. I could explain the meaning of each of them, but that would take a lot more time and a lot more words in order to get the point across. That's the whole point of idioms, is to give someone a message, an idea of a point that you're trying to make in a more concise way. All right. Cold feet, for example, it means that someone is getting more and more nervous and doubtful about a big event as it gets closer. 2 words, cold feet, right? It's probably the best example of a large concept that gets condensed down into as few words as possible, right? But that particular one usually has plenty of contextual clues along with it. For example, he's getting cold feet about his job interview and might not go. Or she's having doubts about her wedding, but it's probably just cold feet, right? So if we were to translate those sentences into some other language that exists 1,000 years from now, whatever the common language might be, probably from the context of those statements, they would be able to figure out that cold feet is an idiom, and they would be able to deduce that it means getting nervous about something and as it gets closer. Just something to that effect. They would be able to figure that out because of the context clues that are along with the idiom, right? But there's other ones that you might not see that with. Right? For example, it's raining cats and dogs. If I were to say, this weather's been crazy last week or yesterday, it rained cats and dogs all day long, right? Somebody in the future looking at that particular statement, if it gets translated into something else, would be like, did they have cats and dogs falling from the sky 1,000 years ago? Like, that's crazy. We've never seen that. That particular idiom, if it's translated word for word, would cause confusion. And that's why some of them are easy to figure out and others are not easy to figure out, right? And this is why it's important to actually understand the culture of the time that the idiom was used, and that's especially important when studying the Bible, right? We can literally translate the words and get the meanings from the context most of the time. There are certain times when people assume that the translation is sufficient without knowing that an idiom was just used. And so that idiom ends up losing its meaning because the words that are translated have meaning, but the phrase as a whole, if it is an idiom that means something totally different, that gets lost. And that happens. It happens sometimes, right? So I'm going to start with one biblical idiom, a Jewish idiom from days long past, that a lot of Christians, modern Christians, get kind of hung up on if they don't have an educated teacher who can explain what was meant when it was used. First one, right? It is the sign of Jonah that Jesus refers to when the Pharisees ask him for a sign, and he says, no, I'm not going to give you any more signs. The only thing you're going to see is the sign of Jonah when the Son of Man is in the heart of the earth for 3 days and 3 nights, just as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of a whale, right? And that's in Matthew 12, verses 39 and 40, right? So, if Jesus was crucified on a Friday and he was resurrected on a Sunday, how do you get 3 days and 3 nights in there? We think, as we're reading it in English, that's 72 hours, right? 3 days and 3 nights would be 3 24-hour cycles, so 72 hours. But Friday afternoon, 5 o'clock-ish, till Sunday morning, 7 o'clock-ish, is 38 hours. That's not 72 hours. So how do we make that work? Some people say, oh, well, he must have been crucified on Wednesday or Thursday or some other. It specifically says in the Bible that Passover day started, it completed, they had the Passover meal on the first day of unleavened bread. That was the Last Supper, and to the next day was the crucifixion, and that next day was the preparation day for the Sabbath, which means it was Friday. He was crucified on a Friday. He was resurrected the day after the Sabbath, which was Sunday, all right? That part is clear, but how is that 3 days and 3 nights? So that's what we got to figure out what they meant by it, all right? So this is an idiomatic usage of the term days and nights to heighten the significance of a period of time that spans over multiple days. In the Jewish culture, it's used in various ways throughout the Old Testament for things like on the third day, so-and-so met with so-and-so, on the seventh day or at the seventh day. Those types of things, it indicates that it was on the third day that the event happened, and that this day, that's 3 days, the event happened, right? There's the hermeneutics link in the description that goes over this really well. I just have an excerpt from it here, where the Talmud explains the Rabbi Akiva fixed a day for an ona and the night for an ona. Ona is a word that they use for day. It's different than Yom, which is YOM, Yom Kippur, Yom Teruah, the day of. There's multiple different words that mean similar things, but the tradition is that Rabbi Eleazar ben Azariah said, a day and the night make an ona, and a part of an ona is as the whole. And Rabbi Ishmael computeth a part of the ona for the whole. So there's two different ways of them saying that a day and a night is an ona, a night is an ona, a day is an ona, but any part of an ona is considered the same as the whole. It's confusing because it's an idiom, all right? So, basically, a single ona is a 24-hour period, but when talking about multiple days, in order to simplify for their culture, because the days begin at sundown, whereas ours start at midnight and go to midnight, theirs start at sundown. So to us, it would be Friday at 5 p.m., but to them, it would be an hour before the Sabbath begins. That's when Jesus was buried, right? All right, so a day and a night make an ona, and a part of an ona is as the whole. That's the way that they view it, all right? And just to make things simpler for them, anytime somebody says 3 days and 3 nights, or on the third day, Those are the ways of saying a part of the day counts as the whole. So an hour of Friday counts as all of Friday. An hour of Sunday counts as all of Sunday. And you have Saturday in the middle of that. That was 3 days and 3 nights based on the idiom, right? Let's see. And that's why the Pharisees asked to post the Roman guard at the tomb until the 3rd day. Not till the 4th day, not to cover the entirety of all 3 days. They said just until the 3rd day. Right? All right. So that's 3 days and 3 nights. That's the idiom. That's the basic breakdown, the easiest way to understand it from the cultural aspect. Any part of the day counts as the whole. It's viewed the same as the whole, just to make things simpler for their culture. Right? Now, the next idiom is not necessarily an idiom, but a figure of speech that gets interchanged and kind of confused by a lot of people, whether they're Christians or not. If they're studying the Bible and they see the phrase, the coming of the Son of Man, or the sign of the Son of Man, those are two distinct and different events that Jesus talks about in Matthew 24, and it's also referenced elsewhere. But I want to specifically hit Matthew 24, 36 through 39, when he says the coming of the Son of Man will be as in the days of Noah. This part, he's talking about the beginning of the tribulation, right? And then when he says the sign of the Son of Man will come, and that's in Matthew 24, 30, he's referencing the end of the tribulation, which is actually harkens back to Daniel 7, 13, and 14. And I'll read that here in just a second. But I want to pair up the coming of the Son of Man, which matches or mirrors other figures of speech. One of those is the day that no man knows, and another is the last trump. And I'm going to get to those later on, but I want you to pin that in your mind. The coming of the Son of Man is the day that no man knows. It's also referenced as the last trump by Paul later on. Yeah, I believe it's 1 Corinthians 15. Again, this is a period where he's talking about the days of Noah, all right, at the beginning of the tribulation period. The world is going about its business as usual, and then Noah is taken into the ark, and that's when judgment comes afterwards, right? With the sign of the Son of Man, that correlates to also the great trump, which I talked about in my Matthew video, and I'll talk about it more in this a little bit later on. Now, for Daniel 7, 13 and 14, which is the sign of the Son of Man that Jesus was talking about, it says, in my vision in the night I continued to watch, and I saw one like the Son of Man coming with the clouds of heaven. And he approached the Ancient of Days and was led into his presence. And he was given dominion, glory, and kingship, that the people of every nation and language should serve him. So again, that part right there, everyone in the world will see the sign of the Son of Man. When Jesus comes back to establish his kingdom, to win the battle, everyone in the world will see him. Right? His dominion is an everlasting dominion that will not pass away, and his kingdom is one that will never be destroyed. And again, that's referencing the millennial kingdom after the tribulation. Right. So that's just kind of going over the difference between the coming of the Son of Man versus the sign of the Son of Man. They are two different events, and understanding that they're different events helps if you're studying any sort of end times like study in the Bible, because there's a lot of idioms that get used in the prophecies and the discussions of end time events. Right? So the next idiom is one that I had never heard anybody explain until about 10 years ago. And I've learned more and more about it over time, and just doing the study for this video has opened up even more to me. So it's a very, very old and deep idiom, and it has two separate usages, right? And that is the day that no man knows, all right? One is in reference to something that people would say when they were betrothed or engaged. Today we get engaged, but if a couple was betrothed and their friends or village people, the people that in their community would ask them, when are you getting married? The response, the polite cultural response was to say, no one knows the day or the hour. Sometimes they would say the day or the hour. I don't know. My servants don't know. Only my father knows, if the groom would say. Only my father knows. Because the tradition was, once the couple were betrothed, and that was a sequence of events that led up to being betrothed, and then about a year before they actually got married. Once they were betrothed, then the son, the groom, would go back to his father's house to prepare a room for them, to prepare an extension to his father's house for them to live in, all right? And so that's when Jesus says, in my father's house are many mansions, many rooms. I go and prepare a place for you, and I will come back for you so that you may be where I am. And if it were not true, I would have told you. He's painting a picture of the betrothal between himself and the church. So once they are betrothed, Jesus goes to prepare a room. He goes back to his father's house to prepare a room. And when his father says, it's time to go get your bride, then he comes down, gets his bride, and they go up to the room that he's prepared. Now, the first link that I have in the description about the weddings is specific to a Galilean wedding. Now, I've heard a lot of these comparisons made from other people, and there's a lot of different websites and articles and things like that that will say these same points, but they don't really do a good job of citing like where in the culture is this. The one that I have in the description is the best one that I can find. If you find a different one that actually does specifically lay out like where they're getting the information from, that'll be helpful, but this one did a pretty good job. All right. The one thing I want to lay out is that some of the different steps that are involved in the whole marriage process, right? The first step is called, and I'm probably going to mess up these translations or these pronunciations, the shidduchin, which is when the father chooses a bride for his son. That's the first step. And then the bride would consent. And then the father negotiates what's called the mohar, which is a price for the bride. It's similar to a dowry, right? After that price is agreed to, they have the ketubah, which is referred to as a marriage contract. I don't want to say it's like a prenuptial agreement, but it is kind of in a sense that, you know, we are going to be legally bound to each other once we get married. This is all the framework. This is what we're going to agree to. And then they would actually have that, they would read it and sign it essentially in front of the officials near the walls at the exit, the outer areas of the city. And it would be a legally binding document at that point. And so once that was done, they would have the, what's called a dabar, which is just a glass of wine that is shared between all parties to seal the deal. And again, that is a picture at the Last Supper when Jesus says, you know, I can't remember it off the top of my head, but essentially he says, I won't drink this again with you until I drink it anew in my Father's house. That's part of the more present day agreement to like, when we drink together again, it will be as we are married, you know, in my Father's house. And then at that point, once they have the wine drink approval and like signification of the contract, that's when they're considered betrothed. And that was the erusin, bad pronunciation probably on that. And that's the betrothal period, which would last up to a year. And that's the time frame when the groom goes back to his father's house to actually build the addition where he and the bride will be living, right? Then they have presents for the bride, they have a cleansing bath, and then they have the preparation of the wedding chamber. That's the wedding area, like a reception area, is called the chuppah. More modern Jewish weddings are going to have the 4 pillars that are in a kind of a square. And it has a canopy on top, And underneath that canopy is where they actually have the marriage ceremony, right? Let's see. Then, they have the nisuin, which is when the bride is lifted up and carried to the actual wedding, and the shatuna, which is the wedding celebration period, right? All right, so I'm just going to read a real quick excerpt from the actual article as far as the father telling the groom to go and get his bride and what the procession would look like, all right? So when the father gives the okay, the groom would arise immediately at what could be midnight to go and fetch his bride, and the wait is finally over. Those who are awake would be ready for the bridegroom's return for his bride and would join the procession. The groom, accompanied by his male friends, servants and friends, would go to the house of the bride at midnight and make a parade with torches through the streets. The groom with his escorts would blow the shofar or trumpet and blast to wake up the whole village. At the sound of the trumpet, the bride and her bridesmaids would wake up and execute their preparedness. So that right there is a picture of God telling Jesus, it's time to go and get your bride. And then Jesus with the angels, with his escorts, comes down. There's the voice of an archangel and the trumpet of God. And at the sound of the trumpet, first the dead in Christ, and then those of us who are alive and remain, which are the bride of Christ, we meet him in the air. And then we go and be with them for the wedding celebration, which typically lasts 7 days. In our case, it will be 7 years. And then they would exit that wedding chamber as a married, consummated couple and return to the normal world at that point, right? So besides that link, I've got a general ancient Jewish betrothal procession. And again, that reiterates the festivities lasting a week. And then the last one about the weddings is a modern Jewish wedding ceremony. It's got a more updated version of this sort of stuff, where there's more of like a regular old engagement and all the other events kind of happen at the time of the wedding, right? But there's one thing that I wanted to point out from that link, and that is the procession for the bride and the groom going to the chuppah, all right? So I'm just going to read through this. I'll comment on it, all right? Royalty are always escorted by an entourage. On the day when they are likened to kings and queens, the bride and groom are accompanied to the chuppah by escorts. A married couple, usually, that serve as their personal honor guards. Usually the couple's married parents. Some have the custom for all the grandparents of the bride and groom to be in the entourage as well. And the escorts lock elbows with the bride and groom while leading them to the chuppah. All the escorts hold candles, symbolizing the fervent wish that the couple's life together be one of light and joy. All right, just a comment on that part. So picture it here. Jesus with his servants, that's his escort. All right. For us, the bride, in this case, the bride has parents and grandparents escorting her to the chuppah, to the wedding ceremony area, right? For us, when Paul says the dead in Christ will rise first, and then those of us who are alive and remain will meet them, the grandparents and parents are the generations who have gone before. Just like the dead in Christ are the generations who have gone before, us who are alive and remain, we're being escorted by the generations who have gone before. We're all the bride of Christ, but that's another picture of what that escort was. It was the generations who had walked this earth before us are the ones that go first, and they escort us who are alive and remain. It's the perfect picture of what that wedding ceremony is going to be like. All right? So after all that preliminary activity, that's when they begin the actual wedding ceremony. The betrothal, the escorts, the presents, the cleansing, everything. Then they go and get married, right? And that's what our existence from the Last Supper when Jesus shared that cup of wine with his disciples and said, I won't drink this again until I drink it with you in my Father's house. That was the betrothal. And we've been betrothed to Jesus ever since then. And God is going to say, go get your bride. He's going to come down. We're going to go up. And we're going to go get married. And we're going to spend 7 years with him before we come back with them. Right? It is a perfect picture, a perfect parallel to a wedding ceremony. All right? So just remember, that's why we're the bride of Christ. Now, the second part of the day that no man knows is an idiom that was used to reference a specific day on the Jewish calendar. Now, the Jewish calendar uses the lunar months. And it starts when the new moon is totally blank. It's black, right? No new moon, no moon visible. That's the end of a month. But once you can first see that crescent on the right side of the moon, just barely right before it sets, because you have the sun, it's new moon's here, the sun's here, you can't see the moon. But once they're off a little bit, and the sun sets, and it's still shining its light, that's where you can barely see the edge of the moon just before the moon sets. That's when a new month starts, according to the Jewish calendar. The way they determine a month to start is that two separate witnesses, Deuteronomy 19:15, I believe, it says, by two witnesses shall a thing be established, or by three. So they have to have two separate witnesses that see the crescent of the new moon and then immediately go to the Sanhedrin, the religious officials in the area, and say, I spotted the new moon. It was just over here. It was below this other star. It was just above the horizon. There were no clouds, etc. If both witnesses go to the Sanhedrin and they give a report that corroborates, then the Sanhedrin say, tonight, because the sun just set, and when they do that, tonight is the first of the month. So they don't know when the month starts until they get that report from the two witnesses. And the reason that's important for them is because all of their festivals, specifically the appointed times of God, there's 7, they're called moedim in the Hebrew, and that just means appointed times. God laid out 7 of them. We know them as Passover, unleavened bread, first fruits, Shavuot or weeks, the Feast of Trumpets, the Day of Atonement or Yom Kippur, and the Feast of Tabernacles or Sukkot. All right? Those are the 7 appointed times of God. And all of them, except for one, happen in somewhere in the middle of the month. So once they have seen that new moon, they say, today is the first of the month. Now we know when these other feast days are going to occur. Usually on a full moon, the 14th, 15th of the month, that's on Passover, is on the 14th, and then unleavened bread is on the 15th for a full week. That's the full moon, all right? So the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur, is on the 10th of the month, and the Feast of Tabernacles is on the 15th of the month. That's the full moon, all right? The only exception to that is the Feast of Trumpets. Yom Teruah, or the Feast of Trumpets, is declared to be on the first day of the 7th month. That's what God said in Leviticus when he was laying out the moedim. On the first day of the 7th month, you shall have a convocation, a day of remembrance. It will be unto you a Sabbath. He's basically saying, this is one of my appointed times, and you're going to celebrate it because it's important to me. It's one of my times. All right? There's 7 of my times. They have lots of feasts, but these 7 are important. Because it starts on the first of the month, and they don't know when the first of the month is until the new moon is sighted by 2 individual witnesses, it has several other names, but one of those other names is Yom HaKesh. And I probably butchered that pronunciation, but it means the day of concealment or the hidden day, because they don't know that day. It's the only one of God's appointed times that no man knows the day. It's literally called the day that no man knows. Because until they see that new moon, they can't declare it the first of the month. And if it's cloudy, or if there's some other event that causes them to not be able to see the new moon, or two witnesses separately don't corroborate the story, then it didn't happen on that day. They try again the next night, and usually they see it the next night. But if it's cloudy again and they didn't see it the next night, then the Sanhedrin will just say, it's that day. We got to make it that day because we know the moon was black 2 days ago and it should be a crescent now. We give it one night, and the next night, if they don't see it either night, then they just declare it that day. And so most calendars today will just say that Tishri starts on this day because that's the astrological new moon, or first sighting crescent of the new moon, when it's 2% illuminated. But traditionally, the month does not start until two witnesses see the new moon. And that's the only day that God appointed one of his times to be a celebration for the Jewish people in remembrance of him, because it's his time. So it's the day that no man knows. Some of the other names for Yom, for the first day of the 7th month, is Rosh Hashanah, which is probably what you've heard a lot of other people call it. Rosh means head, Hashanah means a year, it's the head of the year. So that's they have 2 New Years. They have one that happens in Nisan or Aviv, 2 different names for the same month. Nisan is a Babylonian conversion of the month of Aviv, which means ripe. The city of Tel Aviv is Aviv. That's what the month used to be called. And I'm going to do a whole video on that later on. I've got something in mind for that. But anyway, they have a civil New Year and a religious New Year. But their year changes at Rosh Hashanah, which is, interestingly enough, that's also the first of Tishri most of the time. Once every 50 years, they have what's called a Jubilee year. And when it's a Jubilee year, they move Rosh Hashanah to the Day of Atonement. That's another reason that I believe that the return of Jesus at the end of the tribulation will be a Jubilee year. If it's at the end of the 6,000th year, then that would be 120th Jubilee, and Rosh Hashanah will move to the Day of Atonement. If he's already fulfilled the Feast of Trumpets prophetically before then, the next thing he would need to fulfill before establishing his kingdom would be the Jubilee, Rosh Hashanah on the Day of Atonement. So anyway, that's a little tidbit for you there. I'm getting sidetracked. Yom Teruah, Yom HaKesh, Yom HaZikaron, which is the Day of Memorial, and Yom Hadin, which is Judgment Day. And there's also one for the coronation of the Messiah. And there's 1 or 2 others out there. I couldn't find them, but I know they're out there. Lots of different names for that particular day. All right. So that's 2 really, really in-depth usages of one little idiom of the day that no man knows. It represents the time when there's going to be a wedding, and it refers to the Feast of Trumpets. It could be either one of those things. It could be both of those things. The whole point is, it's an idiom. And so when people say, oh, man knows the day or the hour, that's true, because it's an idiom. It's a cultural figure of speech that applied to them, and the people that Jesus was talking to would have known exactly what he meant by that. Just like if I said it's raining cats and dogs, you'd know that it means it's pouring outside. So when Jesus said, no man knows the day, no man knows the day or the hour, he was saying it's going to be like a wedding, and it's going to be like Feast of Trumpets. That's all I'm saying. That's why a lot of the church is saying, like, the next big prophetic fulfillment that makes sense is the rapture of the church, but also the beginning of the tribulation. They don't have to be at the same time, but if they were at the same time and it was prophetically fulfilling something like that, that would make a lot of sense. I'm just saying, that particular day of the Jewish year is the day that no man knows, and it's the next one of God's appointed times that needs to be fulfilled. So those 2 things go together very well, and it would make sense from our perspective now. It would make sense. Right? The last thing I want to go over is First trump, last trump, great trump. The first trumpet, last trumpet, great trumpet. All right. These are all referring to the trumpets of God, the important trumpets sounds that happen throughout the Bible. All right. The first trump. Before I get into that part, I do want to make a little commentary on this. Because Donald Trump exists, the last 5, 10, 7, 8 years, if you were searching for this terminology, you had to be very, very specific with how you worded your search. Because Donald Trump stories would pop up. I probably had to go through 15 pages in different search terms to actually get to this information, when 10 years ago I would have been able to find it within 5 minutes. But it was just like a mountain of stuff about Donald Trump to try to find this stuff, which is actually important. Right? So, the idioms, the links that I have in the description about these terms are very, very thorough, but they're also very simple. The information is all in there. There's 6 of them. There's 6 different links. There's a couple of books. Both of the books are less than $5. I think one of them's $4 and one of them's like $3.65 if you want to get the actual books. But just reading through the commentary on the books is plenty. Let's see here. First, okay, the first trumpet. When God called Moses up onto Mount Sinai, the Bible describes the appearance and the sound and all of that, the clouds and the thunder and the trumpet sound of God. That is referred to as the first trump. When God gave the law to the Israelites, that was the first trump. All right. The last trump, in general, refers to the Feast of Trumpets, and specifically refers to the 100th trumpet blast on that particular festival period of time. Right? The great trump refers to the trumpet that sounded on Yom Kippur in general, and specifically when it's a Jubilee cycle, a Jubilee year, all right? And then extra specifically for the final Jubilee, that will be at the return of Christ at the end of the tribulation, right? So first trump was a law given to Moses. Last trump is going to be the Feast of Trumpets, the Feast of Trumpets, but also the 100th trumpet blast. There's 4 different types of trumpet blasts that happen throughout the entire festival. It's cool. And the meanings of those trumpets are pretty cool. I mean, the last trump is the very, very last one. I can't remember the name of it. It's got a pretty cool name. But the trumpet blower blows into the shofar and tries to make the loudest, longest sounding blast on the shofar that they can. And I've seen people like show videos of it, and it looks very taxing. It looks very difficult. But it's important. Everybody that hears it knows exactly what it is. All right. So the rest that I got on there is just to go check out those the different links that I have specifically about those 3 terms. There's one down there that breaks down the 7 moedim that I was talking about, the appointed times of God. Really, really good description of those. There's one that differentiates between the last trump and the 7th trump of the Revelation. When you have the seals judgments, the trumpet judgments, and the bowl judgments, some people say that the 7th trumpet is the last trump. But it's not even close to the same thing if you understand the idioms of the day and what they were talking about when they described the last trump. Let's see here. All right. I'm almost done here, guys. There's more articles and exposition pieces out there. They make a lot of the same observations that these do. I just felt that these had the best organization, the most concise presentation of the data that they had found. It's definitely check them out. If you want to know more than just taking my word for it, which I recommend, you don't have to spend the hours and hours on this kind of stuff that I am doing. But if you look at just the ones that I have down below, that will give you a much, much deeper understanding of the culture, so that when you see idioms or hear other people try to, debunk you because you're saying something and they say no man knows the hour, you can tell them that means you're going to get married. That means the Feast of Trumpets. Like, it's an idiom. If I tell you it's raining cats and dogs, you know what I'm talking about. They knew what Jesus was talking about. All right. Anyway, basically, language is important. Context is important. Idioms are important. Culture is important, right? So I do believe in my heart of hearts that whether you're a Christian, non-Christian, Jewish, Muslim, whatever, if you understand the culture that you're studying, you can put to rest a lot of debate that you might have about that culture. That should be the core, the foundation of any argument that you want to make, should be that you understand more than just superficially the culture that you're going to be talking about. All right. So hopefully you can settle any sort of disputes logically and lovingly, and we can put ourselves mentally in the culture of 2,000 years ago. Then we can begin to understand things a little bit better. I love you guys. Thank you very much for watching. Maranatha. Let's go home.